India is a young country with nearly half of its population less than 30 years of age and one third of its population living in urban areas. This interplay between a growing younger population and rapid urbanization challenges traditional family structures, including the institution of marriage and the nature of man woman relationship in general. And it's only natural that legal frameworks and innovative frameworks like prenuptial agreement and cohabitation agreements gain prominence to accommodate this changing dynamic. To understand the legal and the sociological implications of prenups and cohabitation agreements, we have with us Alkanshri Dhar, founder and managing partner of Law Offices of India and a well known civil rights activist. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me on board.
In a recent interview to a major TV channel, you made a compelling case for legalizing prenups. Before we delve deeper into the subject, can you, for the benefit of our viewers, tell us what is a prenuptial agreement, what is a postnuptial agreement, how do they differ from each other, and how do both of them differ from a cohabitation agreement?
A prenuptial is an agreement which both the parties agree before they get married, and a postnuptial is the one that they enter into after they get married.
What are the benefits of having a prenup agreement for either of these spouses? And how does it help in the case of death or separation or divorce or dissolution of marriage?
Benefit of having a prenuptial agreement is that in case there's trouble in the marriage, both the parties, they know how the assets and the properties, including their accounts, etc., will be divided. So it kind of avoids a lot of acrimony between the parties. In these days and times, I think it's highly advisable that both the parties, they get into a prenuptial agreement.
What is the current legal status of prenups?
Prenuptials are not enforceable in India as of now, but I do think it's just a matter of time before they become enforceable. They get hit by Section 28 of the Contract Act, which basically says that no two parties can enter into any provisions or enter into any agreement which gets hit by the provisions of Section 28 of the Contract Act. As such, is something like custody of children, etc., will not be done by the courts as per the terms of the prenuptial. But in a spate of judgments, the Indian courts have kind of relied upon prenuptial agreements. And in fact, there was a judge of the High Court who recently said that they should be made mandatory. I too do think that I think it's a great development. And I think it should be put forward and put into and be implemented by the legislature.
There's a popular notion that prenups are only for the ultra rich, especially the business owners, and not for regular people. What is your opinion on this?
There's notion that the prenups are only for the rich, but which is not true because even the middle class now is increasingly inquiring about the execution of prenups. It is a documentation that I highly recommend should be entered into by both the parties because it will really help them in case something goes wrong later on. Most of the people think that entering into a prenup is like having doubts about their marriage, which is not correct because it's like buying insurance for a car. Once you buy a car, I mean, there's no way that a person's going to take that car out of the showroom without insurance. Prenups is kind of like an insurance because we don't buy a new car thinking that tomorrow there will be an accident. But the point is that if there is an accident, then one is properly covered financially and otherwise too. And even in terms of the relationship, if there's a prenup already determined between both the parties, it kind of puts both the parties on an equal, on a level playing field. So both the parties then can't go back and forth on the terms because they've already signed on it.
Critics of prenups would argue that it sounds as if you are planning for the breakup of a marriage at the inception itself. And in a traditional and conservative society like India, it would meet with strong disapproval. In fact, disapproval is an understatement. It would meet with very stiff resistance.
Critics of the prenup say that marriage is sacrosanct and it's sacred, and that's why entering into a prenup is not proper because it puts doubt in the minds of both the parties that there's a possibility that something will go wrong with the marriage. But that may not hold now because women are getting more and more independent. Even in a marriage, both the parties are equal. And if both the parties are not agreeable about going about in the marriage and going forward in the marriage, I think a prenup goes a long way in kind of settling all the disputes. And in most of separations, property is usually number one. It's not number one, but it's one of the most important factors which make both the parties quarrel quite a lot. So, in case there's a prenup, everything is determined, everything is settled. And if there's a separation, then people will go as per the terms of the prenup.
We have talked about the desirability of having a prenup in the case of death or dissolution of marriage or separation, etc. Can we widen its scope to be of use during the subsistence of the marriage so that it finds greater use to a large number of people and that way it can be more acceptable?
Which says that the prenup should not only be confined to dissolution of marriage, but should also determine how the parties, how the husband and the wife, they interact and conduct their matrimonial home and all issues coming under the marriage during the subsistence of the marriage. That I think would be kind of stretching it too far because the times are not the same. Times change, and there's so many variable factors that come in a marriage. So having an agreement which kind of determines how they will behave during the marriage might be stretching it a bit too far, but you never know in the future how it might turn out.
How many countries have made prenups legal, both in the Western world and also in the more traditional societies like China and Japan? And what has been their experience? Has it increased the divorce rates? And what is the incidence of increase or decrease in litigation?
In the US, the prenups are governed by Uniform Premarital Agreement 1983. And the acceptability of prenups in the US is tremendous. And even in UK, we have around 40% of the people over there are now opting to go in for prenups. It's interesting to know that in UK, the prenups also became enforceable not very long ago. And there are many cases over there in the UK, such as White and White, which basically has put down the guidelines, which I think are very comprehensive and very detailed, and which, in terms, just in case there's a dissolution of marriage, it just makes the things between the parties very clean and very systematic. Even in India, under the Muslim law, there is a concept of meher, which is kind of entry. It's like a consideration which is paid at the time of the marriage. So I guess we could say that the concept of prenup has been in our culture for some time now. Well, only under the Muslim law, though.
From our conversation today, it's clear that prenups is a complex and sensitive issue which has deep social, cultural, religious, and legal ramifications. And it's essential that there be a public discourse involving community leaders, lawmakers, opinion makers, policy makers, and above all, general public to develop a consensus to frame a law which is simple, transparent, fair, equitable, and ensures that the partner with the stronger bargaining power does not ride roughshod over the rights of the weaker, more vulnerable partner.
It's the time that prenups were made enforceable in India, so there has to be a general debate among all the policymakers, lawmakers, and of course the public at large, because they are the ones who really would be the stakeholders in here. But I think it's high time that it was given much more thought than it is getting as of now. And even something like a post-nuptial agreements are also equally important because it will also determine, but because at the time when both parties are married, both husband and wife can sit down and sit across the table and they can actually put their minds to it and determine that in case there was a problem later on in their marriage, how the assets and the properties would be distributed. But like I said earlier, the custody of children, etc., the alimony cannot be determined via the prenup because the custody of a child would depend upon really the child, not till a certain age, because till a certain age, most of the courts, they give the custody to the mother. But later on, I mean, after, when they're 13, 14, 15 years old, when a child is able to make up their mind about with which parents he or she wants to stay, there's nothing which a prenup could do in those cases. It is a concept which has now come of age, and it's high time prenups are made enforceable in India.
On this wise counsel, we conclude this very informative and delightful discussion. Thank you once again for your time.